Now to our top story. The International Monetary Fund has announced that it is raising Saudi Arabia's 2025 economic growth forecast. Citing a quicker than expected rebound in oil production, the IMF now expects GDP growth to the tune of 4% for the kingdom. That's up from a 3% projection 6 months ago. Well, the IMF has also raised its 2026 outlook fractionally to 4% as well. Well, Saudi Arabia is the world's top crude exporter, but the kingdom is in the midst of a vast economic transformation plan aimed at diversifying revenue sources. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Jameel Ahmad, who is the global markets commentator and chief analyst at GTC. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jameel. As we were saying in the introduction, another week has gone by and we've got another upgrade for the Saudi economy, this time the IMF upgrading GDP forecast growth. I mean, what has the IMF said in its World Economic Outlook about Saudi Arabia?
So essentially, if we compare what the IMF were looking for back in April, they were expecting growth somewhere around 3%. That got upgraded at that time to 3.4 and 3.6%, around that range. This week, they've come out in their World Economic Outlook to expect 4% growth GDP for 2025 and 4% growth in 2026 as well. So we've seen another upward revision. And actually, this is successive weeks that we're talking about further upgrades for the Saudi Arabian economy. Only last week, we were speaking about the World Bank. We also spoke about the OECD just the week before. And of course, we also spoke about the previous IMF upgrade. So it seems that the world leading institutions and think tanks are all on the same wavelength, that the Saudi Arabian economy needs to be upgraded for its GDP forecasts. And it seems like despite global economic weakness and some concerns about the global economy when it comes to trade tariffs and some other uncertainties, that the Saudi Arabian economy actually continues to buck some of the more pessimistic trends elsewhere. And it wouldn't surprise me if we have more upgrades between now and the end of the Q4 2025 as well.
Okay, so since we last spoke 7 days ago or so, how has the main Saudi stock index been performing?
We've had another positive week for the Turmoil. We actually went up around 1% following the inflation data earlier this week that showed that headline inflation had slowed slightly from the previous month. Essentially, the slowing down in inflation is seen as supporting the economy when it comes to consumer spending and investment at a time when many businesses and industries are continuing to load up more money and longer-term investments into the Gulf. I would also look at some of the other global economic market movements. For example, Wall Street had some more record highs this week. It seems that investor sentiment is still very much positive towards emerging markets based on US interest rate policy. I would look a little bit more towards the upcoming risk between the US and China, which seems to be hitting another, I would say, trade tariff dispute, and whether that impacts emerging market sentiment this week, next week. However, as far as the trading quarter goes so far, we've had a positive October for the Tadawul index.
Okay, and we've talked quite a bit the last few weeks on this channel about gold prices hitting, well, every day there seems to be a new all-time high. At least that's been the case in the last few weeks. What about silver? Is silver catching up, do you think?
Silver is catching up, and it was only a couple of days ago silver hit its highest level in around 10 years, and that's now been followed by historic highs for the silver price too. I think essentially that investors are diversifying more in towards metals. Of course, we've talked about the gold rally. Gold price is up another near 10% since the last time we talked, and as of today, it was nearly $4,400 US. I still expect that despite both silver and gold looking very overbought on a technical basis, and actually there's no justification for some of these moves we're seeing in the markets, but the more that investors seem to be very much on this one-sided trade, and with some of the macroeconomic backdrop from lower interest rate expectations in the United States, ongoing government shutdowns, which is also positively leading towards more of a consensus that US central bank interest rates need to come down. It seems like it's going to be more positive for precious metals, at least over the near term. And emerging markets, including the Tadawul and the Saudi Arabian index, can also, I would say, jump on that trend too.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, you mentioned the US government shutdown there. We've had 3 weeks now of this shutdown, more or less. I mean, could this have any impact, do you think, on the Saudi Arabian economy?
It could do in terms of the financial market. There's two different ways to look at this. Firstly, if this government shutdown actually does continue into the third trading week, which would be next week, the expectations are going to increase even higher that it's going to impact the US economy. Therefore, it's going to impact the pressure that the US central bank are already under to cut interest rates. Should the interest rates continue to go down in the US, that means they will continue to go down in the region, including in Saudi Arabia. And at the same point, historically, lower interest rate policy and just that narrative is actually a positive for emerging market sentiment. Of course, Saudi Arabia is an emerging market, so that is also going to help matters. And let's see whether the government shutdown does conclude. But at the moment, it seems like it might go on for the rest of October because we have no positive headline yet that is set to conclude in the United States.
Okay, well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk us through that. Thank you very much indeed. Jameel Ahmad, Global Markets Commentator and Chief Analyst at GTC. Thank you very much for your time.